Chapter 14, Part 2. The next day was spent rehearsing for the poetry festival and straightening up the room. Boy, those kids' tables can get pretty messy. I didn't pay much attention. I was hunkered down in my sleeping nest, writing my hamster's heart out. Friday was Valentine's Day and everyone was excited. In the morning, the students mailed their Valentine cards in a big box on Mrs. Bisping's desk. During recess, the teacher sorted out the cards and delivered them. Humming happily, she dropped them in the boxes. After recess, the students opened their cards. There was a lot of giggling and even some crunching, since Mrs. Bisping had also dropped candy hearts in all the mailboxes. Out of the blue, AJ shouted, "Hey, hold on here." That got everyone's attention. "I got a card from Marty Bean." Seth groaned loudly. "No, listen, he says he's sorry," AJ explained. "I got one too," said Garth. Miranda and Heidi had also gotten "I'm sorry" cards from Marty. "But he's so mean," Mandy blurted. "People can change," said Mrs. Bisping. "I think it must have been quite difficult for Marty to write those cards, and he gave them to me to deliver. Maybe it's time to give him a second chance." Phew, giving Mean Bean a second chance wouldn't be easy, yet I recalled that once he got started, he was actually pretty nice when he handed out prizes at the birthday party. Maybe all his talk with him had done some good. No wonder he'd got that A in psychology. "I'll give him a second chance," I exclaimed. Of course, it came out squeak, squeak, squeak. "I hadn't forgotten you, Humphrey," said Mrs. Bisping. She came over to help Og and me with our mailboxes. We received cards from all the students in class. Each one was special, but the one I remember the most was from Miranda. "Though hamster doesn't have a rhyme, I love you, Humphrey, all the time." She'd figured out how to write a poem with the word hamster in it after all. I had one more card in my mailbox than Og. It was from Brazil. Yes, Miss Mack had remembered me with a teeny little card that said, "Humphrey will always be my special friend. Love, Miss Mack." She'd sent a letter to the whole class as well, with greetings from her pupils in Brazil. As wonderful as it was to receive those cards, I kept one eye on the clock all morning, because I had a special mission to accomplish during lunch. A hamster's work is never done. The bell finally rang and the students left, which was good, but Mrs. Bisping stayed behind, which was bad. She busily rearranged all the chairs into a big half circle. She picked scraps of paper off the floor and straightened a few tables. "Wasn't this woman going to eat?" At last she glanced up at the clock, picked up her lunch, and hurried out of the room. I didn't have much time, so I tore a page out of my notebook, jiggled the lock that doesn't lock, flung open the door, and slid down the leg of the table. Og started boinging an alarm, but I didn't have time to explain. I raced across the floor as fast as my legs would carry me, straight to Mrs. Bisping's desk. When I got there, I gasped with surprise. My man was to climb up her chair and take a giant leap onto the desk. It was dangerous and risky, but sometimes you have to be bold. However, the teacher had ruined everything by moving her chair far, far, far away from her desk, into the circle of other chairs. Even worse, her desk didn't have legs to climb up. It was a solid block of wood. My big plan was completely spoiled. The clock ticked away. My only choice was to set the piece of paper on the floor near her desk and scramble back to the table. I grabbed on to the cord from the blinds and began to swing back and forth until I got up to the top of the table. I took the final leap and scurried back to my cage, pulling the cage door shut behind me. "Boing, boing, boing," croaked Og. "You'll understand soon," I told him. "I hope." After lunch, Mrs. Bisping returned to class, followed by her other students. The room mothers arrived with punch and cookies. Next, the other parents entered. Everyone was so busy saying hello, admiring the decorations, that I lost track of Mrs. Bisping. I could hear her, though. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you can take your seats, we're ready for the poetry festival to begin." She talked about what we'd been studying and all the hard work we'd put in. Then she turned the celebration over to Kirk Chen. Kirk was in good form. He introduced each student with a short poem. The rhymes were funny, but they didn't hurt anybody's feelings. For instance, when it was Heidi's turn, Kirk said, "Here's something fun by Heidi Hopper. When it comes to poems, you can't top her." He introduced Tabitha by saying, "Tabitha's new, but boy, can she rhyme. We hope she stays a long, long time." And for AJ's poem, he said, "AJ's poem makes him proud, so don't be surprised if he speaks real loud." AJ did too. I was proud, proud, proud of my classmates as one by one they stood in front of the room and recited their poems. Heidi recited the frog poem she wrote instead of her smiley poem. Tabitha performed a funny poem about a baseball player named Casey. Sahi recited the dove poem, "Pay Attention, Art." Lost his place in his poem, but he started over again and did fine. If anybody forgot a word, Mrs. Bisping whispered it, and nobody seemed to notice. The parents clapped heartily for each and every poem. I did too. Then my heart sank as Miss Bisping said, "That concludes this year's poetry festival. I hope you'll all stay for refreshments. My plan had failed utterly. I glanced over at Og. He was still smiling, but he didn't know what I had planned. But Miss Bisping kept talking. I have one more poem I'd like to share. I found the scrap of paper on the floor as you arrived. I think it expresses the feelings the children in the room have for each other. It's very tiny, a little hard to read, but I'll try. A friend doesn't have to be a work of art, just have a heart. A friend doesn't need to have fur or hair to care. A friend doesn't have to doesn't have a thing to do but like you. A friend doesn't need to say a word to be heard. It's not so hard to be a friend in the end. The room was silent until Heidi's mom started the applause and everyone joined in. There's a scratchy kind of scribbling at the bottom. I can't make out the name, said Mrs. Bisping. Would the people who wrote this like to stand up and identify him or herself? I was standing up all right, and I squeaked at the top of my voice. I wrote it. I wrote it for Og. That's my Valentine to him. Sounds like Humphrey knows who wrote it, Mr. Golden joked, and everybody laughed, everybody except Og. Boing, boing, he shouted, hopping up and down. At last I'd gotten through to him, and now I knew exactly what he was saying. You're welcome, Og, I replied. You're welcome, you grinning, green, lumpy, bumpy, hairless, googly-eyed, cricket-eating friend. You're entirely welcome. Later that night, I looked over at Og as he dove into his swimming pond with a giant splash. He looked the same as ever, yet everything was different. What had seemed like a sneery leer was really a friendly grin. The splashing that once annoyed me made me feel good, because I knew Og was happy, happy, happy. And a lunge that once scared me just meant Og wanted to play a game. Sometimes humans are hard to understand, especially when they act mean, like Marty Bean, or get crabby like Abby. But with patience and a little psychology, you can usually figure them out. It's the same with frogs and even hamsters. I made a few mistakes, but I managed to keep my old friends in room 26 and make a new one too. Suddenly my heart went boing as I thought about how shiny silver new friend, my friend Og. Of what shall a man be proud if he is not proud of his friends? Robert Louis Stevenson, Scottish novelist and poet.